with the State Park Santa Cruz District. So thank you, good to have you all here. And we're just gonna go ahead and jump right in to some of our questions. And my first question for each of you, maybe Chris will start at the end. Oh, no, there's the slide that I was looking for. Okay, so a little bit about each of those. So the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority is a joint powers authority, under a joint powers agreement that was created and funded by a local ballot initiative. And they coordinate the response to preparing for and adapting to wildfire throughout that region. And the next slide, please. Is some of their accomplishments. They're doing some of the home evaluations and their chipper program and home hardening projects, community engagement and outreach, and a number of fuel reduction projects that are underway, including 6,300 acres of fuel breaks and 583 miles of these fuel reduction along evacuation routes. Some of their recent accomplishments. And then Dylan with the Santa Cruz Mountain Stewardship Network. This is a region-wide cross-sector collaboration of a couple dozen land managers, public and private lands. And these are organizations that are working together for stewardship of these lands at a regional scale. In the next slide. This network has completed fine-scale vegetation mapping throughout the region and a digital atlas of the region, created a regional prioritization framework for fire and forest health projects, launched the Spotlight Stewardship Program that brings community leaders out to see what stewardship looks like on the ground, and also has fostered a lot of regional forest and fire capacity projects that are emerging from these different network relationships, including some of the people that you've already met today. Next slide, please. And Davey's with the Central Coast Prescribed Burn Association that serves San Benito, Santa Cruz, and Monterey counties. This is a network for sharing and providing aid to each other for community-based burning. And they've had over 24 counties that are over 24 counties that are covered by PBAs. And Debbie will speak more to some of the specifics of what they're encountering in the area that she serves. Next slide, please. And then the Central Coast Prescribed Burn Association has completed 2 burns, has 8 more planned, has an 8-day prescribed fire training exchange, or TREX, that is planned for this year, developed a fire apprenticeship program for local tribal members, and has conducted a number of trainings in all 3 counties. Okay, and Chris with the Santa Cruz District of State Parks, they have 30 state parks units. We saw earlier today the Big Basin, the first state park, the big impacts. I'd say, Chris, a lot of your life lately has been about fire. This district was really hit by the fires in 2020. And they are also managing for a large number of visitors and significant fire impacts in the parks, and a number of projects that they've been doing across that region. I think that, oh, there they are. So those projects include almost 3,000 acres treated in 10 parks in partnership with CAL FIRE, the RCD, and others, and an additional 1,440 acres of treatments that are underway. And then they launched a 2,000-acre CalVTP project in Butno State Park with San Mateo RCD as well. Thank you. And for those you've been hearing the word RCD today and don't know what that is, it stands for Resource Conservation District. And if you haven't heard of us, we're the best form of local government you've never heard of. And we exist to help people help the land with community-led, community-driven conservation, serving as a hub for different partnership-based conservation efforts in the regions that we serve. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in and ask, maybe starting at the end here with Chris, if you can tell us, how does collaborating help deliver or not deliver on state or regional priorities? And essentially, what is the value proposition for you of collaborating?
Okay, thanks, and great to be here. We would get a lot less done without our collaborative partners. I think, for an agency that manages a huge amount of land, we have a relatively small staff, and one of the things that we need to meet our mission is collaboration with partners that can help us build capacity. And so I would say that one of the things that I think is most pronounced here in this district is our ability to build capacity around areas where we need to move quickly, more quickly than we could otherwise move without collaboration. And a couple examples, you brought one up on the slide, but in response to something like a major fire, where we're looking to increase our ability to not just do fire recovery, but plan in advance for what we know is the need in the future of doing larger scale land management, active forest management. We need partners, and I'm gonna throw San Mateo County RCD in there right away, because partners that have these skill sets and that can move nimbly, that share vision with us, they really can help us, in this instance, create a plan and permitted plan, get us through environmental compliance on a 2,000-acre plan that we can then start executing on, which is huge. Another example, this last year at Wilder Ranch, which is the closest state park probably to where we're all sitting right now, we have been burning there for years, but this last year we probably tripled the amount of prescribed fire that we could do there because we had help. And we collaborated with the Prescribed Burn Association. And so having skilled practitioners that can help us build that capacity with our own state park team literally tripled what we could do in a year. That was excellent, and that's really a powerful thing to think about, especially when we're an agency that struggles to bring on people rapidly. Hiring is not something that we can do quickly. It's not one of those things. And then the third example, I would just say, that helps us meet our mission. The work that we're doing with our tribal partners and with the Amah Mutsun has been another way that we're building capacity, and we're actually partnering on land management in the long term by building capacity both on within our staff, but also within the tribe. Providing experience and providing opportunities, partnering both on the planning but on the actual land stewardship at Koroste, something that has been a collaboration that's extremely valuable.
Thank you. Debbie?
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here with everyone today, and I've been learning so much from everyone, so it's been a really great day. I would say for the Central Coast Prescribed Burn Association, we cover San Benito, Monterey, and Santa Cruz counties, and for us, collaboration is everything. The PBA was started in direct response to a series of needs assessments that I did with my clientele, which are primarily cattle ranchers in my 3 counties, and also land management agencies who use or would like to use grazing as a conservation tool. So in doing all these needs assessments, it became really clear that the people in my communities really wanted to do prescribed fire. Prescribed fire had been an activity that was done historically. Over time, it became more difficult. And so they were ready to try to start doing prescribed fire again. So getting input from the community, I feel, is a collaboration. And then I reached out to the Resource Conservation District of Monterey County, and they are a fantastic partner, and I worked with them to write a CAL FIRE grant to get funding to develop the Prescribed Burn Association. So that in itself, the collaboration with the RCD, made it possible to get that grant. Folks at the RCD have a different sort of skill set and knowledge set compared to me, so they were able to really help with that CAL FIRE application. So, collaboration to decide to try to create the PBA, to get the grant funding to develop the PBA was a collaboration, and now that we are here, collaborations are essential for training. A lot of what we do is training people. So we have some fire practitioners, a lot of fire practitioners across our region who can help on burns like with state parks. And so within our network, we have over 700 people on our PBA mailing list. And some of those people are experts in, how to use radios. Some of those people are experts on how do you take fire weather. And so all of these people come out and they help us with our trainings. So, we have one person, Jared Childress, he's here today. He's our program manager for the PBA, and he's on the ground getting stuff done. But we only have, we have Jared. And it's amazing to take the skills and the knowledge of the people in the PBA and have them provide that to help train others. That's another collaboration. We have the collaboration with the couple of tribes, the Amah Mutsun Land Trust and the Esalen Tribe of Monterey County. We're working with them on a tribal apprenticeship program, Good Fire apprenticeship program. And finally, I want to say that we have a collaboration with San Jose State University. So, we're doing all this on the ground work, training people and doing prescribed burns, but we also are really interested in the research component. How can we add a layer of research onto the PBA? And we're just starting to do that, and I hope to do a lot more of that in the future. But we have a wonderful collaboration with San Jose State trying to look at how to use prescribed fire for coastal prairie restoration.
And Dylan, how would you describe the value proposition of partnering?
I think without having those partnerships, we wouldn't be able to do anything that we're doing. So because of the partnerships, we are able to reach a broad audience. We are able to get people trained, and we are able to get the work done. Without collaborations, none of that would be possible.
Dylan?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. As Kellex mentioned before, I run the Santa Cruz Mountain Stewardship Network, and we have 24 different members who are government agencies and land trusts, the Amah Mutsun tribe, water utilities, timber companies, the Girl Scouts, etc. So there's a lot of different ways that collaboration provides value. It happens at a lot of different scales. One nice example is we have a fire and forest health team, and a grant that the San Mateo and Santa Cruz Resource Conservation Districts got from the Coastal Conservancy had, part of the activity was to do a regional prioritization framework of fire and forest health projects. And so our fire and forest health team could be a vehicle to do that, to get all these different organizations to get involved, to weigh in and make sure that that prioritization framework worked for everybody. We have another team that's working on a regional biomass solution, since that's a common challenge for everyone. But we do lots of other different things as well. I should say, actually, the biomass team, what's interesting about that is, first, it was just a place to share information. So organizations that were using an air curtain burner would come and talk about what that was like, and what the barriers were, and how much it cost, and what was the permitting situation. One with using a carbonator would talk about that. So we could just share information, right? Just create that kind of foundation for people to work from. We also did, it's almost finished now, come June. We've done a vegetation mapping project for the region. The final fine-scale veg map is almost ready. Lots of other different layers have already come online, and people are already using those. So that really informs all the work that the network members are doing. But it's a different way that we provide value. And not only did we do that for everyone to use, but it was collaboratively funded as well. I think a lot of the projects that network members do rest on a foundation of the relationships that the network helps build. So we're working at all these different levels where we're helping to build relationships. We're actually doing parts of the projects they're doing. We're creating, foundational data for them to work from. So all of them are able to do projects. They're able to do more, better, they're able to amplify the kind of work they're going to do. We create the conditions by which they also can self-organize and work together. So it's a real kaleidoscope, I think, of value that we provide.
Thank you. And Anne?
All right. Well, first, it's just fantastic to be talking about this subject. It is a cornerstone of what the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority is. So collaboration is really just key to everything that we do. we wouldn't exist without collaboration. I mean, after the 2017 fires that hit the North Bay, the county fire chief, Chief Weber, and some of the folks who are in the room right now reached out to members of the public, various stakeholders, environmental stakeholders, taxpayers associations, both people who would potentially support a proactive approach to wildfire risk reduction and people who might oppose such a strategy. And really worked out what were the sticking points and how do we then incorporate that into who we are and how we function. So for example, when the ballot measure was approaching and we needed to think through what kind of entity this would be and what kind of language would be our foundational language around preserving biodiversity and reducing greenhouse gases were all incorporated into who we are. Incorporating ecologically sound practices into all of our vegetation management. That was all incorporated into who we are. So it was really foundational to creating the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. And then all of that collaboration and those conversations continue, to this day, fast forward 3 years. And here we are, we still meet very regularly with our environmental stakeholders. We have a lot of different environmental organizations in Marin County, and they're all represented in a group called the Ecologically Sound Practices Partnership. We meet with them very regularly. I meet with environmental stakeholders probably 2 to 3 times a month just to think through what are the issues that might come up, what projects are we working on, and work through some of that together. I started reaching out to our local federally recognized tribe right away when I started with the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority to get an idea for what were their interests and how do we incorporate those into our founding kind of principles as well. We continue that collaborative approach through our organization. So we have a board of directors. We have 17 different member agencies. So we're a joint powers authority, and we have 17 cities, fire districts in the county who are all us. And a representative from each of those member agencies is part of our board, an elected official. And then we have an operations committee, which includes, again, 17 representatives from each of our member agencies, and that's city managers, fire chiefs generally. And then we have a technical committee at the staff level to help create projects and programs and propose things, which then get considered by that technical committee, get considered by the operations committee and the board. So it's really a ground up organization where the different member agencies all contribute ideas and work together to figure out what the next work plan and budget for the next fiscal year is going to be.
So I'm just going to jump in for a second
Yeah.
about this. So clearly, I think a takeaway here is there's no one size fits all, right?
Yeah.
So the way that that regions organize to collaborate to deliver on state priorities may look very different. I have a follow-up question for Chris and for Dylan. You're both, Chris representing a landowner that has many interests beyond forestry and fire, and Dylan working with a couple of dozen entities that might have interests beyond that. I'm thinking about collaborative capacity. And so you might be participating in integrated regional water management and groundwater sustainability and some regional collaborations around climate or food systems or lots of other things for state parks or for the members of the network. So tell me about where this fits into that and what the capacity is for collaborating to have enduring, durable collaborations, delivering on multiple state needs or objectives.
Well, I mentioned the capacity issue, that we face already. I think one of the real values of the way we organize within the Santa Cruz Mountain Stewardship Network is that the framework shifts for the values and what we're facing as members. And I think that's one of the powerful things about it, is that what comes out of it may meet a forest health need, or alternatively, depending on the members and what they're facing, may come out as a watershed, or looking at sensitive species. that type of organization where you don't have to have multiple groups, say, but you're working collaboratively, and the needs are emerging based on how the members are working together. I think that's one of the keys to the success of what we do. So I find that really powerful.
Yeah, one of the things I think about a lot is that the network has an emergent process. Because we have so many different members and such a diversity of stewardship types, we get everyone together, we have conversations about the issues that are important to them, and then we see which issues rise to the top such that we're going to move those into action. And that's kind of what Chris was just describing. So sometimes that's about fire and forest health. Sometimes it's about something else. But a network is a structure that once you get it going, it can do lots of different kinds of work. Networks are essentially structures that you can get work done that you couldn't do on your own. And we spent a lot of time thinking about structure and thinking about governance and really, really spending a lot of time building relationships between the people who are representative to the network so that it can bear some weight. You know what I mean? It's like it can actually do lots of different kinds of work. And we take care, I think, my approach to it is that it's a really listening process, that I'm really trying to hear what's up for the network members. And because they're so different, they don't all want to do the same thing at the same time. So it's different overlapping clusters of network members that'll work on each project.
So this is a question then for all of you, but kind of following up on that. If you're saying that networks are emergent or maybe innovating, for legislators or advocates or others that need to have metrics, knowing what a collaboration will deliver, if we want to fund the capacity for collaboration, what are the metrics that decision makers might recognize for collaboration rather than the outputs of collaboration, which are the projects?
Well, maybe I'll just answer that again because I think about this all the time. Which is once that you have decided that networks are a valuable way to get some of this work done, then you need to look at, what are the metrics of the network itself? What are the metrics of collaboration? So for us, for instance, we have several convenings per year. So if I was a funder, I would look at, there are those kind of mechanisms, convenings or ways to bring network members together. I would also look at representation. Are the major land stewards in the region all a part of this, or whatever topic your collaborative is about? I think another important bit is what is the structure and the governance such that it's going to allow this network to get things done? Because there are a lot of different kinds of collaboratives, a lot of different kinds of networks, and some of them aren't actually built to do work and get things done. But ours happens to be that, and so if that's what you are funding, you'd want to look and see if that's the case. The other thing, I think, there should for sure be startup funding. We were lucky to get startup funding from a foundation so that we had a chance to get going. But a lot of project-oriented funding is about what will you do, and since we're emergent, that doesn't really work for us. But what would work well is what have you done? Like if we look into the past, what's your track record? And honestly, we've got a great track record. We've done so many different kind of things at different scales, all kind of different projects, that we can tell a lot of good stories about the value that the network brings. And so if I was a funder, that's what I would want to look at.
Maybe I could just add a couple of anecdotes about metrics that I think might be valuable. One of the things that we learned as a state organization, as we were partnering and collaborating with Amundsen, was you couldn't use the standard metrics for production when we're talking about things like creating burn piles, doing forest thinning, and things like that, which are standard metrics. When you incorporate the tribal culture and you're working with tribal members, there is a lot of prayer and a lot of ceremony that goes into everything, all aspects of the work and the stewardship. We had to take a big step back and look at that and make sure that that became part of the metric that we're looking at, because that is part of the success. The second one, I would just say, this happened on Tuesday. I was at Henry Cowell Redwoods. We were doing a pile burning project in the park. I was in there looking at it, and again, a metric would be how many piles did we get in a day? That's the way we standardly look at things. What I became very clear to me very quickly is the value of what we were doing out there was the connection with the public. The public was in the park, in the Redwood Loop. They were watching our staff and the docents and the interpreters participate in active forest management. That was the value there. That should have been the metric that we were really looking at. It was so powerful. The public, it was like they were in Disneyland. They were walking around. They couldn't believe they could be in there. They were seeing this. There was this chance to really connect with the value of what we were doing. And I think that, again, is just a change in perspective about metrics.
Davey or Ann, do you have a reflection on this?
Just hearing what everyone's been saying, it really, so I'm with the University of California Cooperative Extension, and part of what we really think a lot about are impacts. So what is the impact that your program has? And I think that's what you guys are talking about. It's not just how many piles burned or how many acres burned, or, it's what was the impact on that, on people's lives, on people's financial, outlook, on the effectiveness of the agency's management. So I think those kinds of things, not just numbers and kind of bean counting, but what was the impact on these individuals or communities or organizations.
And Ann, you have such a different funding mechanism than the others here. And so how do you, is there a need for you to communicate the value of collaboration within your funding model?
I think communicating the value of our collaboration is super important. We need to continue communicating all of our successes and all of our activities. And part of how we do that is working with partners to bring people out in the field, to show what projects actually look like out in the field. There were a lot of misconceptions about what these shaded fuel breaks might look like in the future, some trepidation, concern that we were going to be mowing down the forest. And that's really not how we operate. And we think of ourselves as stewards of this landscape, especially at the wildland-urban interface, because we take a house-out approach. And so we've really been working with partners like the environmental stakeholders, the Ecologically Sound Practices Partnership, to invite people out to project sites and show them what we're doing, and have people ask questions, and tough questions too, about how are you dealing with X, Y, and Z. And I think that conveying all of the work that we're doing and building the trust with our partners, with other land management agencies in the area, with all of our member agencies, the voters are going to be able to judge that success in a few years when we try to renew the parcel tax that funds us.
So along those lines, this is the quintessential magic wand question. For each of you, what would it take to be able to deliver on the total promise of what collaboration can bring? And I want to ask that distinct from the value of the projects that you're implementing. What is the value of, what does it take to deliver on what collaboration can accomplish?
I'm going to start with a couple of financial things, because what it comes down to is being able to do this sustainably. We build this trust, we build this network, we build relationships. But for us, when we depend on our program to expand, because we have partners that are providing that capacity for us, whether it's expertise, whatever it is, what I've seen is it's very difficult for some of these partners to hold on to their talented staff. And so having that long-term financial backing, however that looks, but it needs, and I'm going to target the RCDs, because they're so good at bringing in these skilled people that really benefit not just state parks, but the whole area, the whole region, making sure that they can hold on to that staff that benefits all of us and boost all of our capacity. I think that's a big one. It's not really sustainable the way it works project to project, the funding for that. And then I'll just throw in there that for us to be able to collaborate really fluidly, I've noticed that some of the forest health money that has come to us through appropriation has had streamlined contracting authority. That has made a huge difference to us. So where we can add value to a project that's already happening with a partner that already has something going, that has given us a capability to do that. I'd love to see that continue and be more widespread. It's just one of those things that as a state agency, partnering with folks can be troublesome without that streamlined authority. So.
I'm guessing funding is something that everyone's going to talk about, but I will reiterate that. Right now, the Central Coast Prescribed Burn Association is funded through 2 CAL FIRE grants, which has been amazing and has got, jump-started us. Both of those grants end in March 2024, and we hope the PBA will continue long after that. But really what it takes to have this Prescribed Burn Association is a person who is the focal point of the Prescribed Burn Association, the person who does all the coordination and all the collaboration and keeps everyone in touch with each other and, coordinates the workshops and the burns. And so without being able to pay for that person, we could still have a PBA probably, but at a much, much lower level and not having nearly the impact that we have now. So I think long-term funding for a person to be that focal point of the collaboration is critical for the PBA. So if you guys have any ideas, we did apply for another CAL FIRE grant. We don't know whether or not we'll get it. We hope we do. But if not, we think it would be wise to, continue looking for other funding sources to keep that position going. I also want to say, I know the next thing I'm going to say doesn't exactly fall in line with this conversation, but I think it's relevant because it's so important to the Prescribed Burn Association. So insurance for prescribed burners has been a major challenge. And let me see, I'm going to get the bill number wrong. SB 926 basically created a state-backed prescribed fire claims fund. I think it's a $20 million fund. And that is fantastic. And that is a huge step in the right direction. We're thrilled about that. We'd love to see it get rolled out. We think it's supposed to get rolled out any day now. So we really look forward to that. But with the number of people who want to do prescribed burns, I think we're going to need more than that $20 million. So having more funding for insurance, maybe a variety of different insurers, is really critical in order for this collaboration to continue, because that is one of the things that people are so concerned about. They want to do prescribed burning, but they're afraid because of liability and insurance issues. And I also want to note that this does relate to collaboration, because a lot of the people I work with, a lot of my clientele are cattle ranchers, and they're the ones who are really wanting to do this prescribed fire, and they don't make a lot of money. And so really being able to provide insurance for the burn bosses or private landowners who do their own burning is really critical in order for a prescribed burn association to even really exist.
Would you add to that if you could wave a magic wand, would you have more burn bosses?
Yeah, I think having more burn bosses is very important. I was just looking at at a website, and I think we have 17, possibly 18 burn bosses in the state right now. But as was recently pointed out to me by a new burn boss, is that it kind of doesn't matter if you have burn bosses if you don't have that insurance, because the burn bosses need to have that insurance. So we need both. We need more burn bosses and insurance available to those burn bosses.
And Dylan, your magic wand?
Yeah, so some of the elements for collaboration to happen at the network are, one, what Davey was saying, which is you need the person, which in this case is me, to kind of coordinate everyone coming together and so on. And you need the ability to bring people together like this, right, to do convenings and so on. So you just need like that, those basic mechanisms to actually do the collaboration. So for us, it's definitely funding, for sure. But for us, it's specifically funding decoupled from projects. funding that's specifically for collaborative capacity, not that we have to do some other project, as a part of it, because we are supporting and, helping happen so many other kinds of projects. The other thing I would do if I were waving a magic wand is, because we're trying to bring all these different organizations together, right? But a lot of the organizations are organized to just do the work within their own boundaries. So having organizations start to think in a different way about that would help us. And both of those things, I think, are downstream from worldview or paradigm, like a kind of reductive paradigm of the enclosed organization working on an individual property on like a time-bound project. All of those are sort of difficult, it hinders collaboration. So a more kind of interconnected worldview where we're seeing ongoing relationships between people, ongoing relationships between organizations, and ongoing relationships with the land, I think having that would actually support the sort of funding structures and organizational structures that would allow the collaboration to happen well.
You get to have the last word on this.
Oh boy, the pressure. I guess I'll make 2 points here. One is, I really appreciate that the state has done so much to try to streamline this kind of work. I do think there's a little more room for additional conversations around some of the exemptions, for example, maybe modifying some language around defensible space work along evacuation routes, things like that. I would also say there's more room for conversation around what to do in the coastal zone. How do you manage work like this, doing vegetation management, especially very restorative vegetation management in the coastal zone under the Coastal Act? I think lots of room for conversation there. And I would say a few more things about funding. I think having a consistent long-term funding source changes the collaboration. It changes so that you're not competing against each other for grants. You can be a bit more generous in the give and take of planning your work for the year, of working together and thinking a little bit more big picture and regionally about potential projects. And it allows you to staff up and keep your staff long-term so they become experts in the field and in the region. And it allows you to plan for not just establishing, say, a shaded fuel break, but also maintaining that shaded fuel break into the future. And that's a really big benefit that we see from having a parcel tax in place to fund our projects, assuming it gets renewed in a few years. So I think that, the work that we do is generally house out. So we have, home inspections and funds for residents to do that work. Discoveries found in your home inspection, change your vents, your gutter guards, things like that. Modify your landscaping, evacuation routes, and then moving to vegetation management along homes and neighborhoods, and then moving from the house out to the landscape. There's a lot of work yet to be done from the landscape towards the house, and it's really expensive work. And so funding is always going to be an issue, even if you do have a parcel tax in place.
So on that note, I'm pleased to report that the panel that we're going to transition to right now is going to tackle some of the things in your magic wand. And I want to thank you all for sharing your not one size fits all approaches to advancing these priorities and your perspectives. Thank you so much. Okay, bring up the next ones. Great, so I'm going to invite the panelists up for the second half of this session, where we're going to be talking about navigating some of those complex regulatory requirements for this work. So, wait.
Yeah, I might just take a moment as our panel is coming up. So our panel should go ahead and come up. I took my own direction at lunch and sat with strangers, And one of my new friends now is Lisa Lurie, who's going to moderate a panel later this afternoon, who's the executive director of the Santa Cruz RCD. And she emphasized a point that was made by the panel about ongoing funding for capacity, and that it's really hard if an RCD or a network or an association has to cobble together money project by project. So I want to acknowledge that we hear that. It's a difficult color of money to fund from government, and particularly state government, because our leaders want to see funding actually result in a specific metric in the short term. So I think the more that all of the groups like those that presented just now are able to really talk about, for every dollar, a state or the federal government or a foundation invests in capacity, there's a pretty strong argument for delivering X, 3X, 4X, 5X, 10X in funding, leveraged funding. So Alex, the more that we can move toward that, I just wanted to acknowledge that we're hearing that on long-term capacity, and we need to figure out creative ways to actually help deliver that to groups.
Thank you. I'm going to introduce the panelists that just joined us. So Steve Otten, to my right here, is a consulting forester with Otten Resource Consulting and works with multiple organizations up and down the Central Coast. He has helped to implement a number of CalVTP and projects, and also projects under the new Public Works Plan tool through the Coastal Commission. And then Len Nielsen is the staff chief for prescribed fire and environmental protection at CAL FIRE. He also co-chairs the task force's prescribed fire working group. And then Madeline Cavalieri is the chief deputy director of the California Coastal Commission and was instrumental in facilitating the development of public works plans as a tool for permitting these types of projects within the coastal zone. And then Paul Han is the chief of the watersheds and wetlands section of the California State Water Resources Control Board that implements the general order that is associated with the CalVTP that we'll be talking about imminently. Thank you all for joining us. Why don't I start with Steve and Len. Which of these tools are you using? How's it going? Are they making it easier to get critical projects done? Steve, why don't we start with you? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm supposed to start with the overview behind me. I was very excited to hear from Steve. But I'm also really excited about these tools. So let's talk about them. So the VTP, the California Vegetation Treatment Program, CalVTP, has a programmatic environmental impact report. It's a CEQA document that's programmatic at the state level that many of us use. Oops. Okay. I was just can you go back a slide? Thanks. We're also, the other two that we're going to be focusing on today are the general order through the State Water Board that is associated with the VTP. And the third tool that we're going to be talking about today is public works plans through the California Coastal Commission. Next slide. So the VTP, programmatic EIR, that was developed by the Board of Forestry, provides the statewide CEQA coverage, but requires project-specific analyses. And there are 40 projects that have been approved statewide, about half in this region, and 47 additional projects that are proposed, about a third of which are in this region. This region has really been actively adopting and testing out that new tool. Next slide. And the general order through the State Water Resources Control Board provides automatic coverage under the California Water Code for approved CalVTP projects. And those metrics are going to be the same as the VTP because it's an associated document. Next slide. And public works plans were developed by RCDs with the California Coastal Commission to provide a programmatic approach to projects in lieu of individual coastal development permits in the coastal zone. And this is for the additional protections that are unique to the coastal zone that were not already included in the VTP. There are 4 approved public works plans that cover, I can't see that cover 350,000 acres in San Mateo, Santa Cruz, and northern San Luis Obispo and Monterey counties. There are 5 projects that have been approved since July 2021 that cover 2,400 acres. Okay, thank you. So now, Steve, which of these tools are you using, and how's it going? And are they making it easier to get critical projects done?
Okay, it's a couple-part question. Can you hear me okay?
You have to turn on that button
Yes.
right there.
Thank you. So what are these tools? What tools are you using? And for us, it's predominantly been the California Vegetation Treatment Program. And then we have the question, how's it going? And are they making things, is it making it easier to get critical projects done? And I think a little bit of a history about this is sort of important, is that my experience was really with the 2009 Lockheed fire, and then watching the changes happen through California as a forester, and realizing, wow, some things are really starting to happen here. And about that time, I think a lot of the different land managers, definitely associated with the Santa Cruz Mountain Stewardship Network, are recognizing, like, wow, we better start thinking about what we're going to do here and how we're going to start managing for resiliency. And I think a lot of it started with the first collaborative effort amongst the RCDs for the forest health grants, right? And I think that at that same time when that was happening, is the Cal VTP was very close to being approved. And so all of us are starting to evaluate the measures in the Cal VTP, because we're seeing it, we're seeing the drafts, and we're seeing what some of the different rule sets are that we would have to follow to conduct a project, right? And then that was approved, and it had a wide range of attributes to it for specific species and for hydrology and geology and a number of different assets. And so when that happened, we kind of saw that as, we kind of saw it as the punt. You know, it's like, okay, here's the punt, you guys. Here's this program we want you guys to try out. We received the punt and started evaluating essentially some of our key landscapes. And that question kind of started with, okay, CAL FIRE, what do you guys want to do? What do the local resource agencies want to do proximal into these Santa Cruz Mountain areas? What do the unit fire plans say? What do the community wildfire protection plans say? What areas of resilience are we really concerned about vegetation transition occurring for forest health? And that's sort of what helped us start kind of developing some of our project areas, and where we decided to strategically, and I want to highlight that word strategic, right? It's areas most likely to experience change in vegetative communities due to climate change, temperature, wildfire, disease, or storms, and strategic locations for regional and community wildfire defense that also have to have reasonable access, right? We have to be able to get there too. So like that was part of the strategy that, at least in our involvement, right? We're a small office of foresters, and that there were a ton of other projects going on around us. We were involved in about probably close to 12 Cal VTPs now that we played a role in development, and definitely some great collaboration amongst many of the partners that you're hearing from in this room. And probably that's probably amounting to somewhere around 10,000 acres of strategically placed, almost all permitted, close to being permitted, and initial treatments being underway with a lot of the help of the grant funding that's out there. And we're probably getting close to about 1,000 acres of treatment. And this also, I want to include San Luis Obispo County in this effort too. And that work around Cambria, super important. And there's probably another 1,500 acres right now that's funded and online to develop. So that's a little bit of background. And probably one of the most important things that I want to say about the Cal VTP is it is expensive, right? There's no joke about how much it costs to get this permit, but it is setting you up for the long term, which I think is a real positive to help us strategize and maintain, which I'll get to when we get to barriers a little bit, and that it sets a standard set of measures for resource protections, right? And that we can take a look at the landscape once we know what some of the priorities are, and like, how do we fit these polygons to these landscape locations where we're evaluating the conditions and looking at the criteria of access. And again, we identifying that strategy of where we're implementing those treatments. And that's probably the best part, is it really helps us form it in a way, even though it's not totally fleshed out yet, which I'm sure people will say, it does have a level of regulatory certainty for us. Like, we know what we can do and what we can't do, and there's still some issues to work out. So the information that I might provide today, really, I'm seeing as You gave us the punt, we took the ball, and here's some feedback coming.
So,
Thanks.
so the tool that you're using is the CalVTP. Are you using also the PWP, the Public Works Plans?
Yes, but I was going to save that for a different question, if that's okay.
Special time. Okay. Len, what tools, which of these tools are you using? How's it going? Is it making it easier to get projects done?
So at CAL FIRE, we use every tool we possibly can. It's really based on the type of project and the constraints or resources at risk for that project that we pick the right kind of tool or CEQA document. It's important to understand that CEQA documents are really a process and not a permit, like Steve said. But
Did I do that wrong?
you did, sir.
Thank you for the correction.
We always do that. It's all of us. We often consider the CEQA process a permitting process, but technically it's not. It's just a process, full disclosure. The important thing is that it is a process, it's a known process, and that's really the advantage of the CalVTP for statewide implementation, is that it's a known process in order to get it done, to get the projects on the ground. There's a huge need to do these kinds of projects across California to increase this pace and scale. And CalVTP is one of the newest tools available to practitioners like Steve and others in order to get those urgent projects accomplished. So we use every tool. We currently have in CAL FIRE, we've completed about 16 of the current 40 CalVTPs that are listed on the Board of Forestry website for the CAL FIRE units. We still use our EIR from the Chaparral Management Plan EIR. We have about 105 of those on the books, and so those are also available. And we also often use the notice of exemption process, not a permit. And so through those key tools, that's how CAL FIRE has been increasing our own pace and scale within our own CAL FIRE units in order to increase the fire plan projects that we're conducting across the state. And it's been working. The advantage of a known process is just that. It's a known process. It's known mitigation measures for species or constraints or resources at risk. And so those processes, those mitigations are worked out through a collaborative effort with the other agencies and partnerships.
So let me turn for a moment to the perspective of folks who are in the regulatory agencies about why would you want to do this? What is it? What's the benefit from an agency perspective, or the pros and cons of developing and managing these sort of programmatic or simplified solutions?
You're going to go to Madeline first for that?
Yeah, Madeline, why don't you go first and tell us why did you want to do this?
Sure, yeah. So at the Coastal Commission, we have a number of different programmatic permitting tools. The Public Works Plan is one of them. And the process that we use for the Public Works Plan really allowed us to leverage all of the great work of the CalVTP process. So we worked with the RCD. It was from 2019 to 2021, really developed a partnership, and the programmatic permitting allowed us to do that as well. And we were able to distill down what are the additional protections needed in the coastal zone beyond what the CalVTP already provides for. I always say CalVTP is about 99% of the process, and going into the coastal zone probably need about 1% more. And so we worked over those years with the RCD. One of the really big things that happened over that time was that our ecologists looked deeply at the kinds of projects that were being proposed. And I think we've really shifted from a paradigm of fuel reduction and brush clearance to something that is true forest restoration, that's creating more resilient forests. And so we really want these projects to come forward in the coastal zone. And so this programmatic permitting allowed us to do that. We were able to, like the slide showed, authorize projects over a 350,000 acre area in the coastal zone, which has been great. It's been the years previous to when we started working with the RCD, I think one of the most frustrating things for me was to hear about projects that we wanted to bring forward in the coastal zone that weren't being brought forward. And so we really want these to be coming forward. And then finally, the programmatic permit just speeds up implementation for us. We're front loading the work, working with our partners on the front end, and then when projects come forward, it's easier for us to review, it's faster for practitioners to get through the process.
And how about you, Paul?
Yeah, so I really appreciate the distinction that Len was making about the difference between process and a permit. We're the permit, and we're trying to get rid of the process. So what we did, and maybe a little backup, what's in it for us? We see the pictures of the mass wasting coming out of the burn areas. It's horrifying. We have rivers that now look like roads because they're buried 6 to 8 feet under sediment. There are few things that are more of a hazard to water quality than wildfire. Having said that, we have a legal requirement, and we do have some concerns about how the work is being done. We want to make sure that we aren't trading one problem for another. So what we did is we worked closely with Board of Forestry to make sure that the management practices that we needed for the protection of water quality were built into that CEQA document that they were working with, so that when a project applicant finishes their supplemental analysis, they've addressed the things that we need to consider as part of the water board. In other areas, we would probably still want to take a look at, how this is being implemented, and we might want to make some tweaks and whatnot, but we made a management decision that this work is important. We want this work to be done, and to support that work, we need to make sure that we have as streamlined a process as possible. So on a practical matter, once you have approval from the Board of Forestry's process, you're automatically covered under our permit. We send a letter to you that says, hey, thank you very much for finishing Board of Forestry's process. Here's your coverage under the Water Board. Please call us if you have any question. Here's some information. And so very literally, we're taking the process out of the permit.
It seems to me that there's a very big difference between applying statute in a vacuum and trying to advance beneficial solutions for California while maintaining fidelity to environmental protections. And some of what you're describing, both of you, is that you see your job beyond just applying statute, but more about how you're utilizing these your obligations in the context of what needs to move forward. I want to do a little bit of a deeper dive for a moment into the Public Works Plan, or PWP. I've heard a lot of debate about its merit, given the fact that it's focusing a lot of resources on regional solutions, and this is something that needs to be statewide, throughout the coastal zone. And so, what is the benefit of the PWP if it's not statewide, et cetera? And I'd love to hear some of your reflections on that. Maybe Lynn, we can start with you.
Sure. One of the advantages to the Public Works Plan approach is that if it is a programmatic approach, where it is a known process, that's where it really has a big bang for the buck. Because if it's just for a really tiny area, then it's very specific, and the relationships that we heard earlier that get maintained through networking have to be reestablished every time. And so by having a programmatic approach with a known process, that's where the PWP can really be a benefit. It's really troublesome and time consuming in order to do one, is what we would call a one-off, right? That's really challenging and difficult, and it strains those relationships. So if we can work together in a collaborative approach with the PWP on a larger scale, but still meet the intention of the 1% that needs to get addressed, which we think we can do, then that's where it'll really expedite the process, because it'll be a known process. And that's really the hardest thing with any CEQA documentation, is the unknown.
Madeline?
Yeah, I think that the way the public works plans that we've done for CalVTP projects so far really evolved organically from the partnerships that we had kind of in front of us. I think that the benefit now is that it can be either scaled up to be statewide, or it can be modeled after in other counties. We saw this a little bit already, where we started working with San Mateo County RCD and Santa Cruz County RCD. That quickly unfolded to San Luis Obispo and Monterey counties. And so, we're prepared to kind of go both ways, to do either replicating the process up and down the state, or looking at a more statewide solution. One thing I would say is that the Coastal Commission, the way that our authority and program is set up, is that we do need a partner in this process. And so, at the same time that we're open to having a statewide solution, we're also looking forward to working with statewide partners on such a solution.
So I'm going to ask Steve for your reflections on the PWP in a moment, and then I want to circle back to that and ask, like, what are the next steps? What makes that happen to get to that point of, there's a concept of needing to work together at partners to have a state level solution, and then there's like, what do we need to do next? What is maybe even something we could come out of this meeting planning to do next? So let me first ask you, Steve, as a practitioner, what is your perspective on having used the PWP in this region?
Well, I think the first part of this background I would add to this is the first meeting that we had in the field over the PWP was November of 2019, and I still remember that field meeting because it was, again, the CalVTP I think was a great movement forward, but there were still some things that were left undone, and this is one of them. There are other things that I'll probably bring up today about the PWP. So. That being said, I feel like this again was something where this went back to the local level. We received the problem and we're like, okay, we have got to figure this out. How are we going to do that? Coastal was receptive to it. And a couple things I would say is that it does add additional costs and time. There is a project level review in the document, including a site visit. And staff I would say the staff has actually been excellent. And I hope everybody can hear that out loud. And in a lot of ways, we have tried to coordinate the approval of the PWP in concert with the approval of the PSA, and that timing hasn't always been perfect. And drafting the VTS is not that hard, actually. The vegetation treatment standards.
It's for the PWP.
I almost said the word permit again, so thank you. Phew, that's close. All right, back on track. So when I think about it as a practitioner, I can totally appreciate the idea of a regional PWP. I would be great if it had a similar alignment with how the State Water Board is operating, where the focus time is really on evaluating the VTS and its consistency with the Coastal Act. But I would not stray away from conducting site visits before or after. I still think that's a really important component to continue to maintain our education about the process, the kind of treatments we're completing, and how they're coming out. Thank you.
So then let me come back to Madeline. You said that you've expressed an openness and an interest in finding state level solutions, and that you need partners to do that. What partner do you need, and what would the next step be?
I mean, I think there are multiple partners throughout the state, different practitioners that we could work with. We heard from state parks earlier. Obviously, CAL FIRE is doing a lot of this work. So I think we can work more on who those partners would be. I just wanted to kind of clarify that the Coastal Commission itself wouldn't have the authority to kind of issue a statewide PWP or a statewide coastal authorization. We would be working with practitioners who are working on that statewide level.
And so I'm going to keep pushing the next step. What's the next step? What's your invitation or your request right now, or maybe maybe Len, you have a perspective on this?
So one of the things about a programmatic approach in the CalVTP is keeping in mind that the CalVPT took many years to develop and create and work on that collaborative effort to make that a streamlined process. The PWP needs that upfront coordination and effort that is going to take some time. But we're faced with this real critical urgency to get the projects done. So while the Coastal Commission has been great for working with doing really specific projects, the 4 that they've already done, which like Madeline mentioned was really organic in nature, the next step is to really build that overarching type of document for PWPs that align with, ideally, the CalVTP. And then that process can be more streamlined. But it does take that upfront investment in building those relationships. And that's what we can commit to today.
So that would be CAL FIRE being, I heard a commitment.
And I would just add that I think a lot of the hard work has been, kind of the foundation has been laid with the partnership that's been done in the Central Coast, so that I think that it won't it won't take a lot to get to that next step, which is great news.
That is really great news. And so that is really great news. And I want to now broaden the umbrella to what remains to be done. So we've got some bright spots, definitely. And we've piloted something in the Central Coast that's working. I can say as a practitioner in San Mateo County that that it is true that Coastal Commission was a significant, those permits were a significant barrier before in a way that they are not now. I'd be interested in seeing that at a state level for many others to be able to use. There's a lot of work that remains to be done, and maybe we could talk about a little bit about what barriers remain and what's next. It sounded like you were maybe chomping at the bit to talk a little bit about that, so why don't I pass the ball to you?
I don't know about chomping, but I have a couple ideas. When probably one of the other, there's been a variety of different barriers that I think are pretty well known and pretty well discussed throughout today from some of the different ideas of worker capacity or prescribed burning and whatnot. And I think we're moving forward in the PWP, which I think is excellent. But one of the things that is, I think, super challenging for us out there is not anything new to the California Environmental Quality Act, right? And the way that the CalVTP vegetation treatment program was structured is that there was a lot of very specific information in there for certain species, but there's still a lot more that need to be covered. And when it came back to the local level, there were projects being proposed in the coast that where agencies were being notified as part of the CalVTP process, part of the program, and a lot of issues came up about specific species. So sort of like the PWP, there were immediate negotiations with United States Fish and Wildlife Service and other agencies among a variety of different species to try to come up with a set of measures in which we could move forward. And a lot of those are really successful. And I'm really grateful for the amount of organizations and what the agencies have been doing to try to come together and help move this mission forward. And I feel like more of that needs to happen. Like more of the species need to start being discussed and come up with a set of reasonable measures and where we can conduct these operations. It's probably the biggest barrier. And really, when you think about that, the direction that we're moving, these are ecologically restorative treatments across our landscape that also include shaded fuel breaks. And there needs to be some kind of agreement where when we're operating in this capacity for wildfire resilience and ecological restoration, we really need something in place to help us move forward. And there are species that a number of the great environmental consulting groups here have worked on, and other foresters that can obviously share some of those measures to the appropriate people. Agencies are obviously familiar with them, and maybe that's a starting place too, just like where the PWP is coming from.
And Len, is there anything, what would you say is next? What barriers remain? What's next?
Well, I think one of the barriers that we see with the CalVTP right now, outside of the CAL FIRE ones that are built by staff within CAL FIRE, is the cost of the CalVTP. And Steve mentioned that earlier too, is that there's a rising cost to doing these CalVTPs. The original inception of the CalVTP was it would be cost effective, but it is rising with the uniqueness of the species that are in the project area. So as we do more and more of these CalVTPs, we should see a reduction in cost because the known mitigations will occur. You know, we're figuring this thing out still. It was approved in late 2019. So, you know, it was first used in like the middle of 2020. So it takes a while to really use this new tool. And so as we use this new tool, we're going to work out where there are holes. You know, it's not a perfect tool. It is an environmental document. No environmental document is perfect. At the end of the day, you want to protect the species or resource, and the CalVTP does that. So I think the next barrier is just use, just frequency. There's only 40. That's really not very many.
And so, Madeline and Paul, I don't know if either of you, before I ask the executive committee if they have any questions of this panel, I don't know if there's anything that you want to add about, oh, there's one more question apparently. Oh yeah, that's what I'm asking right now. We'll come back to you. You can talk about your permit. No. So Madeline and Paul, did you have any thoughts about what barriers remain and what's next?
Yeah, I would echo what Steve said about, the challenges with moving into more of a forest restoration kind of thinking. I think that obviously as our climate is changing, we really need a new paradigm for how we're thinking about forest management and how that relates to the ecological protections that we have in the coastal zone and throughout the state. And so I think there needs to be a deeper understanding among all the stakeholders and the practitioners and the permitting agencies that we really have to do something new to respond to the to the dramatic shifts that we're seeing from climate change. And then I also just, as a Coastal Commission employee, I just also have to add that, staff resources are always an issue for us. That is sometimes why it's a challenge to work with us. A modest level of funding would allow us to move forward on the things that we're talking about today.
So I'll echo Madeline's, if you don't mind, real quick, with staffing issues. CAL FIRE is in the midst of staffing issues as well. It is a problem with any kind of new program like this. One of our staffing issues is within our archaeology and cultural resources program. We're currently short-staffed. About half of the staff that we normally have are vacant and have been vacant for almost 2 years. And so we have a significant issue there, which we are trying to resolve internally. And we're really close to getting that resolved. In fact, we just are flying one of our archaeology positions as an environmental scientist, hopefully this week, to try to help resolve that issue, to fill that position. It's very challenging to fill those, and so we're seeking new solutions to reduce that specific bottleneck in this environmental review process.
Oh, it looks like Paul was going to add one more.
Yeah, I've actually got 3 short ones. 2 of them just piggyback off yours. Resources. We actually did pretty well at the State Water Board recently, but it's all with limited term funding. So we've got funding for about 3 years, and then I don't know how we're going to pay for the program. The regional boards didn't get any resources to implement some of this work. So there's a real resource need at the state and regional boards. The other thing I'll note is, as Len said, only 40. There's only 40 projects that have been approved under the VTP, and we were frankly expecting more, and we're hoping for more. We're hoping that this is just a startup issue. A little concerned that maybe this signals an interest in using other tools that, as Steve mentioned, may not have the kind of regulatory certainty that we've tried to build into the VTP process. So that's something we're watching and frankly are a little concerned about. The third thing I'll mention is the VTP is wonderful, but it's limited to the state responsibility areas generally. And there's a lot of land in California that is either under local responsibility or federal responsibility. And we as an agency need to figure out how to expand our permit into those other areas, and we want to do that, but we don't have a VTP to piggyback off of in those areas like we do in the state responsibility areas. So that's going to be a challenge for us moving forward, is figuring out how do we get rid of that process that we're so proud of with the VTP when there isn't a VTP to build off of. So more to come.
Thank you. And then we have maybe 1 minute for you to say what's next, and then I'm going to ask Secretary Crowfoot if there's any questions from the executive committee.
Okay, I'll make this last part fast. So, when you start thinking about it, like I talked to the different unit leads from San Mateo, Santa Cruz, Santa Clara's unit, and San Luis Obispo, and you start getting an idea of how many acres are approved and how many acres are in development. And it's pushing like 40, 50,000 acres. And then you start looking at CalMapper, and you start looking at where all the forest health grants are, and you're starting to see linkages, right? We're starting to see linkages from large-scale landscape level projects from one project to another. And what that does to me is it makes me think about what are we going to do for the long term, right? What's our maintenance idea of how we're going to try to maintain some of these uses? And a lot of it has to do with how we strategize, right? How we strategize where we place those units and strategizing the important acres. And there's going to have to be some kind of format for development. And I've kind of heard this maybe bounced around a little bit, but is the format for the future with so many acres that we have to treat, maybe some kind of incident command system where we have a good understanding for what we need to conduct for pre-treatment activity surveys? And maybe it's kind of like a resource protection team that's in ahead of time that does all the layout, gets everything flagged, reports up to the command team, says, hey, we got 1,000 acres in Santa Cruz, looking good, it's all laid out. We'll start pre-treatment activities. And then a pre-fire command team comes in that has the resources at their fingertips, right? And with the resource protection team, we're talking about you want to use your local contractors and local people who have knowledge of the area that can help maybe guide the actions of kind of a pre-fire. So the scale is going to get so large that how we think about maintaining it is going to have to be a large-scale effort too.
I want to thank you all for that. And Secretary Crowfoot, pass this over to you to see if the executive committee has any questions or comments.
Yeah, well, first of all, just a couple high-level comments. I really do appreciate the amount of work that has gone in trying to accelerate the ability to deliver these projects. And I want to give a specific shout out to the Water Board for really a pretty radical departure from your approach and really linking up and aligning directly with the VTP. But I want to take a step back because I feel like sometimes in these complex conversations we get mired in an alphabet soup of acronyms and requirements, and we lose sight of the forest for the trees, to use an apt metaphor. We are a few months away from what could potentially be the next catastrophic wildfire, destroying communities, costing lives, decimating the environment, creating noxious smoke for tens of millions of Californians, including our families. I was just in the Dixie burn scar 10 days ago. I drove down the coast and saw the CZU burn scar. Those environments are decimated, and I'd say nuked. And we talk about accelerating these projects, and we see some modest progress. 40 projects on the VTP, 4 out of how many coastal counties are there? 15, 20 counties? I call that progress modest. So I want to maintain concern on behalf of all of those people that don't understand the complicated environmental approval process to say, I don't think we're moving quickly enough. The governor and the then chief of the U.S. Forest Service committed 3 years ago to treat 1 million acres of land in California by 2025. 2025 starts in 17 months. So while I appreciate and applaud the efforts to date, I want to continue to challenge us as government to figure out how we can help these projects happen more quickly. Because I sometimes think we get caught in our own sort of statutory obligations and existing protocol, and we lose sight on the opportunity cost. And that is, if we don't get these projects in place, catastrophic wildfire will continue to decimate our state. We saw projects shape fire, control fire in the last wildfire season. We need more of those projects on the ground. We have 1,200 projects happening across the state right now, and very few are probably covered by these accelerated processes. So I want to just provide a bit of a reality check. I think it's helpful to get in these details, but I want to caution us against incrementalism, because I think we need to move much more quickly than we have to date.
Let me maybe frame that. First of all, I certainly feel a lot of that same pressure, but I want to ask this in the form of a question. And we will, at the task force, sponsor some conversations along this line so we can align CalVTP with the Coastal Act to get moving quicker. But the question is, and the goal of that effort is, can we go big, can we go collaborative, and can we go fast? Because what I'm hearing from you and from the earlier panel is we want to be collaborative, but being collaborative takes time and money and expense. It's messy. It can take years to get folks. And I've had plenty of members of the legislature say, literally, we don't have time for collaborative barbecues. We need to go. So why shouldn't we just give CAL FIRE and the Forest Service money to go treat? So somehow collectively, we've got to convince people that collaboration is more than getting people on, that you can do both. We've got to figure out a way to be collaborative and fast, and we've got to be able to meet all these regulatory commitments and go fast. So we've talked to the task force about potentially doing, and this gets a little bit along the lines of what the gentleman was talking about, is borrowing from the Forest Service, which has NEPA teams, actually bring in teams to an area to try to figure out how we can accelerate, and also maybe doing a manual on how you do NEPA, CEQA, and permitting over large scale. How do you mark trees over tens of thousands of acres rather than hundreds of acres? How do you do bird surveys over tens of thousands of acres? How do you get all that done? We're hearing people doing it anecdotally, but it's not being done systematically. So every area on their own is trying to figure out how to go big, how to go collaborative, and how to go fast. So I'm just interested in your comments about whether or not in the Central Coast, given where you are, can we do all three? And are you guys, you think there's the willingness in your community to get together and to do that? To work with us to try to, as the secretary said, not skimp over regulatory requirements or the need to collaborate, but do it at the same time. And tell me, I don't know what the right, how you guys know better than I do. How long does it take to get a project done now? From start to finish, come on, be candid here, today, versus what we can get to.
With the Cal VTP, we're seeing about a year in development, at least, from the time of concept to complete, as a typical time frame for the Cal VTP.
Okay. But that's an improvement, right?
Well, yeah, because it was brand new just 3 years ago.
Right, but I mean, before that, it took, what, 2 or 3 years?
It would take 2 years.
Yeah.
If you were to do something comparable, which would be a mitigated negative declaration, or MND, would be the equivalent. For a large-scale project. Otherwise, the low-hanging fruit have been small-scale projects.
I might add here, I'm kind of basking in the glow of the praise, thank you. But we aren't the only agency that has really been digging into this. And so when you talk about pulling the CEQA down to a year, you're also eliminating, our permit process, and you're getting a reduced effort on a number of other permit processes, and that added time on the back end. In many cases, CEQA was the beginning of the process. So there's a lot of places where this is.
Yeah, and I think the reason why I praise the Water Board specifically is because you could have said, well, we're going to still have our own permit process, but we're just going to, take it down by 20%. But as I understand it, you've essentially signed up for the VTP. So if you're satisfying the VTP, you're satisfying your permit, and you did a lot of work to make sure that your statutory obligations were met in the VTP.
There was a lot of long, hard negotiation that happened as a part of the VTP so that we didn't have to do that now. There's trade-offs. We talk about wanting to have regionally specific solutions. That's hard to do within the context of a statewide permit. In a lot of cases, there's trade-offs. You can go fast, or you can do it at a level of quality that you'd ideally like to do. And there's some trade-offs that we had to make. And again, given that the worst thing for water quality is probably to have the fire come through, that seemed like a good thing for us to do.
And I'll just add to, and I don't want to modify what I said, because I think we should all constructively challenge ourselves, because we have a huge challenge on our hands and we have to move fast. So I don't understand half of the complexity you're all dealing with, honestly. But I do know we have to think outside of the box. And I do know that we have to ask ourselves really tough questions around, how quickly do we think we can actually deliver a project while meeting the function of our requirements, not the letter of each regulation that's been established and calcified over time. You know what I mean? So I'm not suggesting we throw all this out, but let's step back and really think how this can happen as quick as humanly possible.
Are you talking about some kind of emergency order that still has some specific requirements of pre-treatment activity surveys to cover those specific species, kind of like you did with the fires, right? Are you talking about something like that?
Well, John, if I'm being honest, I don't know exactly what I'm talking about, which is par for the course. But
at least you didn't say permit.
And that's what keeps these task force meetings interesting, right? But I will say you're hearkening back to what we did in partnership with Jessica Morris, who's our Deputy Secretary for Wildfire Resilience, who's here today, when the governor said, look, we have communities that we need to protect before the next wildfire season. And so he used emergency order to waive CEQA and require my position to essentially sign off on that CEQA waiver. And we only did so with a specific amount of assessment and essentially proactive mitigation activities. And we got those projects done. And it was pretty incredible. It hadn't been done before. So I guess I would invite suggestions. And maybe that's a question in the form of a suggestion. And yes, he says. But like that's the kind of big thinking that we need, because again, we want to protect the resource. And I also want to, Madeline's point was a good one. We want to actually shift to the, what's going to be actually restorative and not just getting a project done to get it done, but what do we need to do to, maintain this? But we can't work under the existing paradigms necessarily, because we're going to move too slow.
Wait, no.
Oh, Sam.
I couldn't help myself think the same way when the daunting challenges are being listed. I think, and the governor putting our feet to the fire in terms of the urgency of the time and the challenge of the problem. And when Neil was talking about Cal DPT, I couldn't help think, but you thought Cal GPT is what you thought you thought I was saying, and then my brain started going. When you think outside the box, you may need to think outside a different kind of box on this challenge. Steve's talking about the challenge around pre-fire command and incident command. I'm thinking, is there a role for artificial intelligence here? I mean, should we think outside the box and maybe go to our tech companies and great thinkers and bring them in the mix? So I'm thinking out loud. That's what came to my mind in terms of the challenges that we have and what do we need to do to think outside the box. California leads in that space as well. I'm just putting that out.
I just wanted to follow up on one thing, I guess, Wade, your point about 2025 is just around the corner. And to me, that is something, as a task force executive committee member, I think about a lot, is how much progress are we making towards a million acre strategy. And as we had our Sacramento meeting, just seems like a week ago, but it's been a little longer than that, Scott Stevens had mentioned an initiative that he and I and Sarah Clark are co-leading that's focused on stewardship at a federal policy level. But in listening to the conversations today, thinking about species, thinking about cultural resources, and coming back to what I had talked about, the indigenous stewardship of this landscape, to me, a lot of the challenges that we put in front of ourselves from a policy perspective are out of sync with the way that the indigenous stewardship of this landscape, which created the landscapes that are here, are now regulated in a way that are out of sync with that. So how do we then realign ourselves, realign our policies to recognize, in particular, indigenous stewardship, which is done in a way to facilitate the ecology of the species that we're stewarding for, and also protecting the cultural resources within those landscapes. And I can think about a tour that we did recently up on the Big Chico Creek Ecological Reserve with Chief Tyler and folks from FRAP and others, where we had members of the Mechoopda tribe along with us looking at burns that we'd recently done in October. And one of the cultural resource monitors for the reserve, or for the tribe, specifically walked over, and this was a site that was a cultural site, it was a village site, and picked up an arrowhead and said, we have no issue with these burns taking place out here the way that they're done, because they're done in a culturally informed way. So I guess the challenge is how do we align our regulatory frameworks in a way to support what I'll call light projects on the landscape, and facilitate that. So it's more of a thought, I guess, to share. Thanks.
If I may add two reflections here. One, I wanted to add, I think, Patrick, you were the person who just said that it takes how much time does it take now versus before? And I think there's another piece too, which is that when you remove some of these barriers, there are some people who are inclined to do projects who otherwise wouldn't. So it's not just that it reduces time for people who would have done projects, but there can be a chill effect so that people don't even think to undertake them when they appear to be too complex. And sometimes perception is key in that, regardless of what the actual reality is. If people feel like there's a simplified, easy way to get something done, they're more inclined to step up to do it. So I think that really matters. The other reflection I wanted to offer is, unfortunately, the panel that was talking about collaboration isn't here right now, but I want to unpack a little bit the perception that collaboration means going slowly. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think there might be an upfront investment in collaboration, but what we heard from some of these panelists is some of the things that they've been able to accelerate when they otherwise wouldn't have been able to, because their partners can fill in missing pieces or capacity or leverage. Some things are in place. It also helps provide more continuous capacity when, for example, the partnership between state parks, the Amah-Mutsun Tribal Band, and the RCD, when Amah-Mutsun had a dip in capacity or state parks had a contracting issue, instead of everything stopping, the RCD could come in and make sure that the work continued until the other pieces came back in. So I think that actually having enduring collaboration and collaborative capacity can make this work go much faster overall.
So I would just conclude on, what I think is a constructive note, which is, we're working hard. Our regulatory agencies across state government have, work to be outside the box, and we need to do more, and we need to think bigger, and we need to continue to problem solve. I think that the crux of this discussion is, progress, yes, but with a lot more work ahead of us. Excellent. Well, thank you. Let's thank our panelists once again. All right, as these folks get off the stage, we're going to turn to Allison for another interactive exercise.
Hi, everybody. I am your substitute Allison for the next few minutes until Allison returns. I'm Forrest. I'm going to give some instructions real quick before I'm going to ask you to turn to the people at your table. First, for everyone attending online and for people in the room, let's take a minute to reflect on the conversations that we heard. Let's take a minute to think outside of the box and to consider, in light of the discussions that we just had, what do you need with the projects and the programs and the collaboratives that you work with to really deliver on the promise of those collaboratives and to take that big leap forward? Whether that's thinking about the box from a regulatory perspective or thinking about how your partnerships work together moving forward. So we're going to be generous this time, and we're going to take a whole 5 minutes. And please do, now that you've met some of the people at your table, join with those people on your table, bring in those different perspectives. Go ahead and start now.
I can't even.
We're going to burn it all.
Nobody.
Hear me? Whoa. Okay, there you can hear me. If you can hear me, clap once. Yes. All right, if you can hear me, clap twice. I think, okay, if you can hear me, clap 3 times. All right, I think that's good. That's great. We did it in 2 claps earlier. That was 3 claps, still not bad. Let me ask, is there anybody, any of these tables, actually look down here. Does anybody at this table really want to share maybe one of their outside of the box ideas? Anyone? Not, do you want to share? No, it's okay. It's okay. Anyone, raise your hand. I want to hear. Oh, here we go, and I'll come to you next.
Streamline the distribution of the billions of dollars that are available.
Wonderful. Get that money rolling out the door. Let's hear another one.
At our table, we talked a lot about that thinking outside of the box and innovation. And even in the best of intentional conversations with senior leadership, executive leadership across agencies, across organizations, a lot of agreement on, yes, let's get this done, but there's a disconnect through the process and procedure 5 layers down. And so that's where things get hung up rather than through the partnership conversation. And so how do we address that?
Thank you. Cutting through bureaucracy. All right, we got one more from Peter.
Yeah, my question is, do we have the staffing and infrastructure capacity to do more work per year or per unit time?
Thank you, Peter. I think that's actually going to be a great transition to our next panel in a second. And actually, as we're getting that next panel up, and go ahead and take your seats for our next panel. I'm going to go to, let me go to 1 or 2 more tables as we get them set. Anybody want to raise your hand? Anybody? Okay, I know thinking outside the box is tough, but we do want to hear from you, and there will be a meeting survey at the end of the day. Last thing logistically that I want to pass on to everybody is that if you parked in the lot across the street, you must validate your parking on your way out. So don't forget to do that. It'll save a pretty penny. One more logistical announcement. I'm spending way more time on the mic than I was expecting. Is somebody has lost a pair of reading glasses. They appear pink. And so I'm going to have these at my booth over here if anybody has lost those. So with that, I will hand it back to you, Wade.